This is a little story about a recent situation I had where I had a coolant leak. I was looking for the leak, couldn't really find it. Over time, the leak got a little worse, which I expected. Still couldn't find the leak. I suspected the leak was somewhere where it wasn't. So I kept driving until I found the leak. Well, I found the leak while I was on the interstate. My water pump leak almost totally gave way. So I had to pull over on the side of the road and change my water pump. So this is the details of that. In the winter, during one of my weekly checks, I noticed my coolant level was a little low. It was below the maximum mark, almost to the minimum mark. So I topped it off, no big deal, when the car was cold first thing in the morning. Well, about 3 or 4 weeks later, I noticed it was getting near the minimum mark again. So I started looking for the leak, and I noticed a couple of drops on the bottom of my heater cord. So the seals at the heater cord connection was leaking. I went on ahead and replaced the heater cord since I had to pull it off, and I had a brand new one with me, and put it all back together. About a month later, I got a low coolant light, so I topped it off and started looking for this leak. Couldn't find the leak. A month later, I seen another low coolant light. So I began to look for the leak a little bit harder. Still couldn't find it and suspected it may have been the radiator. So I took a road trip, had to top it off one time during a 4,000 mile road trip. So it still wasn't bad enough for me to find. I didn't look hard enough, and later on it developed a little worse. I seen a little coolant residue on the radiator, so I thought it might have been a radiator. I was preparing to get a radiator, and just so happened one of my junkyard runs, there was a brand new niece's radiator in the junkyard. I say brand new, I imagine it was under a year old. Still had labels on it, was very clean, so I pulled it, put it in my little stash, and I figured after my last road trip, I would go ahead and replace that radiator. Well, I went from Albuquerque, New Mexico to Ohio, and as I pulled into Ohio, I get a low coolant light again. So I traveled almost 1,700 miles and just barely emptied my bottle, you know, from the normal line in between minimum and max to where I got a low light. Temperature was fine. I topped it off on my way back home, figuring I would replace the radiator when I get home. Got to Little Rock, didn't have to add any coolant. Got in the car at Little Rock, headed back to Albuquerque. It was full when I left Little Rock. By the time I hit Oklahoma, my low coolant light came on, so I had to investigate. From the time the low coolant light came on, there was a rest area a couple miles away. I got off the exit and found the leak. So here's the rest of it. Well, I'm driving down the interstate. I just left Arkansas. I'm about 30 miles into Oklahoma, and I look down and I see a coolant light up. Up ahead, about 1.5 miles, 2 miles, is a rest area. So I'm gonna pull into that rest area and investigate why I've lost so much coolant in just about 180 miles. So I get out of the car, I pop the hood. I'm looking around for some kind of hose leak or radiator leak. I can't find anything. I pop the timing belt cover, and lo and behold, there's a bunch of coolant and coolant residue in the timing belt cover. So the water pump is leaking pretty good. And there was a lot of fluid under that side of the motor when I was looking under the car for drippings. And then I looked a little closer, and I don't know if you could see it, but the timing belt was actually hanging off the water pump about 1/4 inch. I was driving down I-40. I looked over, I had a coolant light. My temperature was still good, so I still had enough coolant to drive, but I'm losing coolant. So I pull over, I pull the timing belt cover off because I'm looking for where this coolant is going, and my water pump took a dump. Of course, your water pump is under your timing belt, so I have to basically do a timing belt job to get to this water pump and replace it. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove the tensioner. I'm gonna line the timing, remove the tensioner, pull the belt off of the water pump, remove the water pump, drain the coolant out of the system, install a new water pump, slip the belt back over it, and then double check the timing and get out of here. I'm gonna try to do this in an hour or two. There's supposed to be a water pump here for me in 45 minutes. And these are the tools that I carry with me when I travel. Super blessed. Had the water pump off maybe 5 minutes, and the guy told me that the new pump had just arrived. So I'm getting ready to toss this back in. And if you don't use gasket sealer and stuff when you put these on, look at that thing came off, and almost all of the gasket came off, so I don't have to sit here and fight with the gasket. Okay, I got my coolant filled as high as I can. I'm gonna put just a little bit more in there because it'll burp a little bit. My timing belt is actually tracking on the tensioner again because it was actually tracking off. So I guess that pump was about to bust its shaft. But it doesn't look like I'm leaking coolant, so I'm good to go. I'm gonna put the belt cover on and get out of here. I did already start it. Moral of the story is, when you're playing coolant roulette like I was, you gotta take the time, find these leaks. Sometimes it's hard, but make sure you check all the points: the radiator, the hoses, the water pump, the heater core. Find that leak, get that changed, so that you're not on the highway like I was and end up having to change a water pump on the side of the road. Now, I had a buddy that I went and met in Little Rock. I replaced his timing belt for him. He had a coolant leak, and he thought it was the turbo supply hose. Turned out it was one of his heater hoses going from the block to the firewall. That hose was so bad that I was able to grab the hose with my hand and just tear it off of its connection. So make sure you find these coolant leaks early, because if you overheat the motor, that's going to be a big expense and a lot of labor if you do it yourself. And if that water pump would have broken on me, it would have threw my timing belt and I would have lost the head as well. So try not to rush coolant roulette, and find those leaks and get them fixed.